All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're grabbing a magnifying glass and taking a really close look at a fascinating, highly polarizing report titled The Anatomy of Civilizational Abdication. Now, we aren't here to take sides, endorse, or condemn these viewpoints. Instead, our goal is to neutrally deconstruct the author's arguments and figure out the absolute bedrock architecture of their worldview. Why does this actually matter to you? Well, because understanding the mechanics of this specific framework gives us a crucial skeleton key. It helps decode some of the most intense, fiery populist rhetoric circulating in our world today.
To do this objectively, we'll follow this roadmap: Respil's parable of collapse, the hollow man elite, shifting institutional roles, modern cargo cult theory, and finally, the remnant's proposed choice. Starting off with Section 1, Rossvale's parable of collapse, from fiction to an operational manual.
So, the whole premise of this report actually hinges on a controversial 1973 novel by Jean Raspel called The Camp of the Saints. But here's the kicker. The report doesn't treat this book as just fiction. No, it treats it like a literal prophecy that's unfolding right outside our windows right now. To really get what the author is saying, we have to start with this core concept: Western self-hatred. The text defines this as the terminal conviction that the West's survival is, well, a moral crime. The author uses this idea as the central engine for their entire narrative. They aren't saying Western decline is some natural historical accident. They're arguing it's an intentional, civilizational suicide, driven entirely by a deep-seated self-loathing among its own people.
Which leads us right into Section 2, the hollow men elite, and the pathology of the ruling class. Here's where the report really digs into the psychology of modern leadership. It frames the ruling class as a failing immune system for the nation. It claims these leaders have been basically hollowed out by universalist ideology, and it points to three very specific symptoms. First up is historical disconnection. The argument here is that modern elites just view the nation as a giant economic zone, treating Western abundance like it's just dirt you can easily buy and sell, totally ignoring the fragile generational inheritance it took to actually build it. Symptom 2 is eschatological delusion. It's a big phrase, but it basically means a radical, almost religious belief that destroying their own borders will magically wash away historical sins and create a global utopia. And the third symptom, a sudden, fatal loss of resolve. To show what this sudden loss of resolve looks like in action, the report zeroes in on a very specific moment from Raspel's novel, a prime minister giving a public address. The text highlights how the leader starts with a firm, masculine command to resist, but then suddenly pivots to a completely paralyzed, squishy appeal to individual conscience. He basically just tells the public to follow their hearts. For the author of the report, this exact literary moment is the ultimate pathology of modern leadership. It is the exact second a leader actively abdicates their duty to protect the nation, signaling a total, exhausted surrender to the outside world. Moving to Section 3, shifting institutional roles. The report ominously calls this the architecture of surrender. Okay, so the report claims a massive theological inversion has happened, specifically in Christian hierarchies. Traditionally, the church's focus was all about saving souls and protecting the specific cultural inheritance of its flock. But today, the author argues that foundational connective tissue has been totally flipped. They claim the traditional mission has been entirely replaced by what they call temporal or invader worship. So according to this really intense critique, the church hierarchy now frames the active deconstruction of Western society as a literal moral imperative. By doing this, the report insists the church has essentially swapped out the real Christ for what the author dramatically calls a Messiah with a million heads, meaning a mass migration movement that's now revered as holy. Next up, the report takes aim at the media, flat out branding it the beast. The text defines this apparatus as using low cunning to sanitize invasion and actively manage public decline. And it's not just talking about regular media bias here. The author argues the media deliberately weaponizes empathy by intentionally manufacturing moral panics and tweaking our basic language, like deliberately swapping out the word migrant or illegal for newcomer. The media ensures that any native instinct for self-preservation is instantly framed as pure, inexcusable evil. It's basically a system designed to crush dissent before it can even be spoken. Then we look at the government itself. The argument here is that the state has completely turned its monopoly on force inward. The text points out this stark, chilling contrast. On one hand, the state is completely, deliberately passive toward massive, encroaching crowds. But on the other hand, it unleashes overwhelming, crushing force. We're talking bombing or jailing against native right-wing resistors. The overarching takeaway from the author is that the government actively punishes its own citizens
just for the crime of noticing that the demographics are shifting. All of this sets the stage for Section 4, Modern Cargo Cult Theory and the Post-Landing Reality. The report makes it abundantly clear we aren't just talking about a 1973 literary warning anymore. We are firmly in the post-landing phase, where the fiction is now an undeniable modern reality. To prove this, the report lists some very specific modern events: taking over an ancient French palace to house migrants, exporting Venezuelan crimes straight to the American heartland, erasing iconic London two-blind identities, and even jailing an Englishman just for handing out stickers. The author absolutely doesn't see these as random, isolated things. To them, local zoning spots, international crime, and domestic speech laws are all unified, glaring symptoms of the exact same systemic cultural abdication happening globally. This all builds to a really fascinating idea, the cargo cult mentality. To fully get this, you kind of have to know the history. During World War II in the Pacific, isolated tribes watched military planes drop massive crates of supplies. After the war ended, the planes stopped coming. So what did the tribes do? They built mock airplanes out of wood and vines, hoping to summon the supply drops again. They wanted the goods, but they totally lacked the vast industrial knowledge required to actually make them. The author applies this exact same analogy to modern immigration. They argue that arriving masses want the material wealth of the West, the nice apartments, the infrastructure, the plenty, but they don't understand, value, or even want to maintain the fragile culture and political systems that actually built it all. On top of that, the text claims that the sacred right to identity is the ultimate third rail of modern politics. The report says this right to celebrate your heritage is enthusiastically cheered on for every single global group out there, except Western natives. For them, it is explicitly, forcefully denied. By demonizing the founding demographic as this universal outgroup, the author insists that keeping civilization stable is basically impossible. In their eyes, it's a brutal equation. If you remove and demonize the specific people who built the structures, you're inevitably going to be left with nothing but a landscape of ruins. Which brings us to a really dark ultimatum in Section 5, the remnants' proposed choice: resistance or devourment. To fight back against this perceived terminal decline, the report doesn't offer half measures. It demands severe, uncompromising methodology. The author sees survival as a strict binary choice for what they call the remnant, the people who still actually possess the will to exist. Their plan? Identify a unified public enemy, completely close the borders, execute mass deportations, and fundamentally replace the current regime. These aren't pitched as points for a polite political debate or some gentle compromise. They are presented as pure, unapologetic, strategic necessities to avoid being erased. And to wrap up the argument, the author points out a really chilling literary detail. Remember the book we talked about at the beginning? Well, Jean Raspail intentionally left out a crucial part of his biblical epigraph from Revelation 29. He included the part about the camp of the saints being surrounded by enemies, but he purposely cut the very last line, the part where fire from heaven comes down and devours the invaders. The report uses this brilliant omission to make a bleak, final philosophical point. The West has no guarantee of a miraculous rescue. There's no fire coming from heaven. If they don't act themselves, they'll simply be devoured. So, we're going to leave you with this final, objective question to ponder. Does this critique reveal a literal, terminal decline in Western willpower? Or is it just a massive, reactionary misreading of modern globalism? Whether you see this text as a prophetic warning of collapse or a highly dangerous ideological distortion, understanding the architecture behind it is absolutely essential if you want to decode the fiery rhetoric flying around our world right now. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep analyzing, keep asking the hard questions, and I'll catch you next time.